We begin tonight here with the breaking news after the deadly shooting of that ICU
Footage has emerged of Alex Pretti, filmed 11 days before he was fatally shot
this
by
morning,
Border
a growing
Patrol.
number of Republicans are joining
with
Democrats.
breaking news in the investigation into the
Minneapolis, the death of Alex Pretti.
So you have these Minnesotan that are out there protesting with a 9mm gun, with extra magazines that are getting in the middle of our immigration officers and the operations that they're conducting to remove people that have largely done something bad. Child molesters, domestic abusers, fraud, drug charges, right? They're not taking hardworking guys from Home Depot that are standing out there saying, I'll redo your bathroom. They're not taking those guys to jail. These guys and their mugshots have done something wrong, and we are coming after them. And if you get in the middle of our operation to arrest them, then we're going to have problems. And so what does Tim Walz do? He says, well, he could defuse the bomb. He could defuse the bomb, ladies and gentlemen. He could say, stay home, right? They said it during COVID, stay home, shelter in place. It's fucking -10 degrees. Who the fuck wants to go outside anyway? But no, he's pouring lighter fluid on the fire thinking that's going to put out the fire? Lighter fluid? Go out there. Represent for all the Minnesotans, right? Get involved. Pull out your cell phones. And so what ends up happening ultimately, shocker alert, is that the people that can be riled up to leave the comfort and warmth of their home in the dead of fucking winter in Minnesota, which, by the way, I think is the coldest state in our nation, right? Their winters are grueling, right? We should just give the state to Canada. We don't even need them. What do you think they do? If you can get them to leave the comfort and warmth of their home and they're out in the middle of these operations filming with their cell, of course they're going to do something dumb. For Pretti, the facts that we know is that he's an ICU nurse and he's heading to a protest. And as Kristi Noem said, right, Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, why does an ICU nurse need a 9mm semi-automatic handgun with extra magazines? Why does he need to stay strapped if he's just heading to a peaceful protest to just film, unless he's looking for a confrontation with the state? You've got Stephen Miller's characterization of Pretti as this would-be assassin, which I think is pretty accurate, right? If you're approaching federal agents, you're signaling that you have this sort of clear ideological intent to use force to stop the government, to stop the state, to stop legal deportations. And again, these are legal deportations. These people that are being rounded up and apprehended, they're not here legally. They're not here to work jobs in Minneapolis and do good within their community. And again, if we're looking at legal definitions here, does it meet the FBI's legal definition of domestic terrorism? It does. Violence and threats to influence government policy. So yeah, he is a domestic terrorist. And if you look at the video, again, you don't like my opinion? Great. Let's look at the video. Pretti violently resisted when agents are trying to disarm him. And again, split-second decision, agents can't wait to see, if a hand's reaching for a phone or if it's reaching for a firearm, right? They're trained to just neutralize the threat. And he violently resisted. So again, his presence at the Renee Good protest earlier in the month, this is a clear pattern of radicalized Minnesotans, right? He wasn't a bystander, right? He was a sort of committed activist at best, right? Sort of ideologically, right? Using his sort of lawful permit, right? Second Amendment right, but as a Trojan horse, right? To carry weapons, 9mm semi-automatic handgun, extra magazines into direct conflict with law enforcement. So you could argue, right? Because, a lot of people are trying to sort of frame this as like, well, Pretti, how was he was any different than Kyle Rittenhouse? Yes, radically different. And I'll explain. Kyle Rittenhouse, by the way, is a hero. He was invited by local business. And this has been proven. You can't argue this. You want to come at me in the comments? Come at me. But there is proof that he's invited by local business owners to protect property during a riot where the local police had clearly retreated. And in contrast, Pretti wasn't invited to come protest. He was the uninvited agitator. And yes, he was interfering with federal agents who were doing their job on scene. No, they're not the same. And again, with regard to Rittenhouse, he only fired his rifle when being chased and physically attacked, and that is proven in court. You don't like me? Argue with the court. Pretti was an initial aggressor. He breached a law enforcement perimeter, and he did it while being armed, right? What do you think the agent's response was going to be? Like, this is a preemptive act of self, sort of defense for the community. The guy has a weapon, multiple magazines. They are not the same. And that true law and order, and I know Democrats hate this phrase. Republicans love it. And listen, I'll criticize the Republicans when I don't agree with them. But if you want law and order, it means that you support the federal agents over these vigilante citizens, right? Rittenhouse was helping the system. Pretti is trying to dismantle it. Very different. I'm a two-way guy. I own firearms. As a lawfully abiding citizen, would I take a firearm to a bar? No. Why? Logically, you're inviting chaos. I'm not thinking I'm going to have a few drinks, I'm going to pull out my gun and go like this in the middle of a bar. Nor do I think I'm going to push someone accidentally or on purpose and then pull out a gun in retaliation, right? Because, they got mad, I pushed them accidentally or on purpose, and then I'm going to pull out a gun to kind of get them to comply. No, I do not think I'm going to do that. But should we get into a tussle in the middle of the bar, the gun falls out of my waistband, I'm appendix carry, gun falls out, hits the floor, somebody picks it up that shouldn't, and then fires the gun. I'm inviting chaos. Now, go to a place of worship. Am I going to bring am I going to appendix carry? Absolutely. To defend my place of worship. Quite dissimilarly, there's a protest going on. People are angry. They're fired up. People on both sides want to attack each other at the throats. Am I bringing a gun to that type of party? No, I'm not. Why? Because it's that same level of chaos inside the bar, but astronomically different results. What do I mean by that? It's crowded. There's a lot of people, high density, extra magazines. What are we talking about? We're talking about a bar fight gone wrong where somebody accidentally gets shot to, I don't know, a dozen people get shot, or I'm the one that's getting offed by, another person with a gun or by somebody in law enforcement. You're making a recipe. And you shouldn't put something in the recipe. You're like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to do it anyway. And then you're acting surprised when nobody likes the dish. I'm baking muffins. I put, they're blueberry muffins. I think I'm going to put jalapenos in there. Nobody likes blueberry jalapeno muffins. And for the fringe that do, great. That's a corner case that is a few amongst many. But you would literally have to be a retard of the century to believe that you have a Second Amendment right to bring a gun to a protest and then act like things are going to, that things are going to end up okay. You're inviting chaos. Don't invite chaos. You want to go? Listen, you have a constitutional right to go and protest, but it's a peaceful protest. That's the right that you have. Let's not confuse peaceful protesting with inciting riots and bringing firearms. And then let's not be surprised when you do bring a firearm to this high density protest and somebody dies or many people die. Because I get, again, that Pretti guy, he's one guy that came to the protest with a handgun. And by the way, extra magazines. One guy that we know of. But how many other constitutionally caring, citizens were there with firearms? There could have been a lot. It could have ended much, much worse. Thank God it was just one guy that ends up getting shot. It leaves you to question like, hey, listen, sure, right? Our president could be doing better. He could be saying, guys, stay home. Do not get in the middle of this. Let us get our operation done. Let us, get these people off your streets safely. Stay home. Let us complete our operation. Let us do it with as much kindness and empathy as we possibly can. We respect your community. We want it to be safe. These people have done harm to your community and seek to do future harm. And we're sending in dangerous people, right? To remove them from your streets. But please do not get involved. And at the same time, right, from the governor level or from even the mayoral level in Minneapolis, they could be doing the same, right? Ignoring their political affiliation, just saying like, guys, like the president said, I disagree with him on XYZ talking points, but we got to get these people off of our streets, right? And this has nothing to do with racism, and this has nothing to do with, fraud scandals. These are people that have done bad things. We got to get them off our streets. We got to make our community safe for our kids. At the end of the day, right? That's why we're in office. And I think if you could see, right? If you could see greater synergy from the executive level of both our federal and state level, again, with the local level, right? With Frey, you would see less mobilization of crazy white Karens and Darrens, as was just, met his untimely death. We would see less of that. We don't need these people, interjecting and getting involved and playing some sort of interlocutor middleman. Let us just conduct the operation, get the bad guys off the street, right? Nobody wants this for their community. Nobody wants, Department of Homeland Security and the National Guard. We don't need this, but we've got to keep the community safe, right? We have to. And if the state government's not going to do it, if the local government, which isn't tasked with, making immigration raids, right? They can't do it. And if the state level can't do it, we got to bring in the feds. And it's an eventuality. Again, I come from a border town. I own a company on the other side of the US border. I love the multicultural aspect of America, but I also like to see people assimilate, celebrate American holidays, right? Respect American values. And I don't see that with the Somali culture in Minnesota. Minneapolis is a profoundly democratic stronghold and has been, I want to say, for the last 50 years, right? They haven't elected a Republican mayor, I think, right, since the mid 70s. And in fact, right, they I think since the late 1970s, every mayor has been affiliated with the DFL. So again, that's the Democratic, farmer labor movement. It is a strong affiliate of the Democratic Party. And going back to the whole Jacob Frey thing, this guy's been the mayor since 2018. This guy was just reelected to a third term, right? And is slated to finish out his third and final. The guy doesn't care about changing anything. This guy is as much as a political pawn as Mayor Gavin Newsom, or whatever Donald Trump calls him, Governor Newsom. But I think, their state in general has like the longest streak for voting Democrat in presidential elections. And I think, again, that dates back to like the, mid 1970s. And it was, in fact, I think it was the only state along with DC that wasn't won by Ronald Reagan in 84. And so that sort of gives you an understanding of like who lives there. Now, talking about like those that are Somalian or of Somali descent, that whole diaspora, right? When the Somali wars were happening, right? They got, and I think this is in the early 1990s, they were dumped into Minnesota. And they were dumped largely there because of the Lutheran social services and Catholic charities that are actually located there. They got these, easy to come by jobs that were these entry level jobs in like the meat packing industry and sort of other sort of industrial entry level jobs. And what had ended up happening is they weren't just settled in Minnesota. They were settled in New York and they were settled in Texas. That diaspora ended up just realizing that for language and cultural and religious reasons, God, it's just better to move, to Minnesota. And it created like this secondary migration effect. So, they settle in all these different states because of the war, and then they're, coalesced or like, ended up, right, just sort of emigrating to Minneapolis. And now I want to say roughly 84% of the Somali or those of Somali ancestry are receiving some type, whether it's state or federal assistance, with roughly like 21% of native-born households in the U.S. that are receiving some mixture or one of the two of state and federal. And I think, and these aren't my numbers, right? This is data from the Center of Immigration Studies that produces this data for the U.S. government. Another interesting fact, and again, these are facts, these aren't feelings, is that the median household income for Somali Minnesotans was $28,000. $28,000. And by the way, that is the lowest of any cultural group in the state, right? So ignoring, you want to be blind to religion? Perfect. Be blind to religion. We're just looking like, hey, culturally, right? Where do these people come from? You're coming from Somalia. You make less than $30,000 on average per household. Why is that? Why is that? Because they're making money off the social assistance programs. So let's get into it. Recently, right, we've got the fraud scandal, right? The Feeding Our Future scandal. That is a major talking point. And I wish, tragically, that 2 Minnesotans didn't have to die recently, because really what it's done is it's taken the focus off of the fraud that's going on in Minnesota. It's we're approaching the midterm elections, which are a big deal, right? We want to maintain control, right? House, Senate, President, right? We don't want to lose control. And unfortunately, like any empire, we're eating ourselves alive with scandal. And so the Feeding the Future thing was kind of like boxed out by these 2 untimely deaths, right? In sort of Minneapolis. But we're talking about a theft of over $250 million. And some estimates are even higher than that from this federal child nutrition program that was happening during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And so, everyone's shouting, well, Somali fraud, Somali fraud, Somali fraud. The organization's leader was white, right? But most of the people that have been convicted in that program are of Somali American, descent. And so I think largely the statistics argue that those of Somalian descent in America are a drain on resources. Okay. And I think, those who disagree with that perspective are ignoring the facts, right? Only 60% of Somali Americans speak English, right? They've got the lowest English proficiency out of any group in America. And I get it, right? They arrived as refugees, they arrived with no assets, but, again, super high poverty rates, low English proficiency, proclivity to fraud. It's not like the people that we invited in have built a wonderful country. They haven't. Somalia is not even a real country. It's not even a country of laws. They don't have an army, right? They don't have stability, right? It's a nation constantly at war, and I put nation in quotes, What do we need to bring these people in? What are they providing to the United States? You bring Mexicans into the US, what do you get? Hardworking, great culture, great food, right? The Italians, the Greeks, the Irish, the Jews, the Asians, the Indians. You're inviting in people that have built great nations. What do we have to fuck with the Somalians for? We shouldn't have gone into their war. We shouldn't have gone into their country. What do we care if their country falls? So why are we bringing them here? And then why are we astonished that we can't integrate them? Like eventually America's going to wake up and go, well, hey, we're inviting them in because we thought as Democrats, if we invite them in, then they're going to vote for our party. But again, eventually the Democrats are going to move to the middle and they'll start to realize, like the 1990 Democrats, right? The Hillary Clinton, Democrats, they're going to start to move to the middle. They're going to start to realize that like, hey, you can't have a nation without borders. You can't have a nation without laws. And as such, maybe it's not a great idea to keep importing the worst into our country and then hoping for the best. That's not a great plan. The plan to just, stay in office long term, that is not a great plan for the country. That is certainly not a great plan on a more myopic level. That is not a great plan for your political party, because you will end up having the fringe that you import become the center of your party. Ilhan Omar, right? Great example. Married her brother. That's how she got to America. And now somehow she's the center of the Democrat Party. Is that what you want representing your party? Do you want Mamdani in New York? Is that the center? Right? Is that the center of your party? Well, if it is, just expect the Republicans to just keep winning in perpetuity. I think one of the things that makes our nation great is that intractable relationship between the Democrats and Republicans where they just can't get along. And therefore, not a whole lot changes in America. And who the fuck wants change anyway? Right? As Americans, we kind of love not getting anything done, which is obviously the opposite. This morning I'm listening to Andrew Tate talk about Dubai. And he's like, well, in Dubai, right? Fuck democracy. You want to build a building? Just go do it. Right? Meanwhile, in the EU, they're sitting there arguing the point for 3 years. In America, it's very much, right, an affiliate of Europe, where we just kind of debate things in the public square, right, in circles until one party just gets tired, worn out. And then eventually, like, we pass a law, but it's eventually, right, doesn't happen quickly, right? America doesn't like political progress. We kind of like to stay in the middle. So I think as Americans, the best thing that we can do is pray for greater communication from both sides of the aisle, clean up these streets, right? And have this be some sort of footnote in American history.